Buried beneath the most secure building in America lies a secret that could shatter our understanding of history itself. When construction workers accidentally discover a mysterious copper box sealed in the White House foundation since 1945, they unleash something more dangerous than classified information, technology that shouldn't have existed. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, an expert in World War II military artifacts, is summoned to examine the find. But as she uncovers connections between the strange device and unexplained Allied victories, powerful forces emerge from the shadows. Someone is willing to kill to keep this secret buried, while others race to reactivate a network that can manipulate how we perceive reality itself. What if our greatest triumph, victory in World War II, wasn't won through courage and sacrifice alone? What if history, as we know it, was engineered? And someone has just flipped the switch again? The metallic thunder beneath the East Wing floor made Agent Coulson's fillings ache. Not the usual renovation noise. This was different. A sound that didn't belong in the White House basement. His spine stiffened as the construction crew backed away from the drill, their faces pale beneath layers of chalky dust. "Stop! Everyone stop!" Coulson whispered, his voice barely audible, yet somehow filling the narrow corridor. The workers froze, sensing the shift in atmosphere before comprehending his words. The security lights overhead cast elongated shadows across their faces, transforming ordinary expressions into masks of unease. The drill operator wiped sweat from his brow, leaving behind a muddy streak. "Sir, we hit something, not on any blueprint." His finger trembled as he pointed downward. Metal. Old metal. Coulson kneeled, feeling cold seep through his suit pants. The flooring had given way to reveal something foreign embedded in the concrete, a dark iron surface with no visible hinges or handles, just a perfect seal against the foundation, as if the building had been constructed around it. As his fingers traced the edge, microscopic dust particles scattered, dancing in the beam of his flashlight. "Get me a crowbar," he ordered, surprising himself with the decision. Protocol demanded he report upstairs first, secure authorization, file paperwork. But something, intuition or perhaps something darker, pushed him forward. When the crowbar arrived, the silence had grown oppressive, the crew's breathing synchronized in uneven, shallow patterns. No one spoke as Coulson wedged the metal bar into the seam. The first attempt produced nothing but the squeal of metal against metal, a sound so high-pitched it triggered an involuntary gag reflex in the youngest worker. "Again," Coulson commanded, sweat forming along his hairline despite the basement's persistent chill. The second attempt sent a vibration up his arms that settled in his molars. The third broke the seal. A hiss escaped, not air releasing but something else, a sound that made everyone step back instinctively. The odor that followed wasn't the expected mustiness of a long-sealed space. It carried notes of scorched copper and ozone, like lightning had struck indoors. Coulson's nostrils flared, his body registering danger before his mind could process why. "Sir, maybe we should—" The foreman's suggestion died as Coulson raised his hand. The basement lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized at a dimmer intensity than before. With gloved hands, Coulson widened the opening. The iron door yielded reluctantly, revealing a small chamber no larger than a safe. Inside sat a copper box, roughly the size of a bread loaf. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns that resembled circuit boards, but weathered as if centuries old. The symbols formed spirals that seemed to move when viewed peripherally, a visual trick of the poor lighting, surely. "Camera," Coulson said, extending his hand without looking away from the box. No one moved. He turned to find the entire crew had retreated several steps, their faces contorted with unexplained dread. The foreman's left eyelid twitched rhythmically, his knuckles white around his clipboard. Coulson turned back to the copper box. His training dictated caution, distance, procedure. Yet his hand moved forward autonomously, hovering inches above the artifact. The air between his palm and the metal surface felt charged, creating resistance like opposing magnets. The moment his fingertips made contact, every light in the corridor extinguished simultaneously. Total darkness enveloped them for 3 seconds that stretched like eternity. When emergency generators hummed to life and dim amber lighting returned, Coulson was holding the box, his expression vacant. "Put it down, sir," the foreman urged, his voice cracking. "Please." But Coulson only stared at the object in his hands, transfixed. The copper felt neither cold nor warm. It felt absent, as if holding a void. The worker nearest to him suddenly collapsed to his knees, hands clutching his temples. "Make it stop," the man groaned, eyes rolling upward. "The instructions, they're not." Security personnel appeared at the corridor's end, summoned by the power fluctuation. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the box in a containment case before Coulson could protest. His fingers remained curled in the shape of the box even after it was taken, as if holding a phantom object. Later, in the makeshift debrief room, the crew sat separated from each other, eyes downcast. No one mentioned the shared headache that had developed, nor the compulsion to return to the basement that gnawed at their thoughts. The security official collecting their signatures paused at Coulson's station. "This incident is classified," she said, her tone suggesting this was no ordinary security measure. "You were conducting standard renovation work. You found structural issues requiring attention." "Nothing more." Coulson nodded mechanically while his mind raced with questions. Why was the box there? When was it sealed away? But one thought eclipsed all others, the distinct feeling that the artifact hadn't been discovered. It had allowed itself to be found precisely now, exactly when someone had decided it should be. That night, alone in his apartment, Coulson dreamed of copper circuits and silent commands. He woke with a single thought surfacing through layers of consciousness. The box wasn't just an object, it was listening. And now, it knew who had heard it. Dr. Eleanor Hayes stepped into the basement corridor with its clinical white walls, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that betrayed her nervousness. The security checkpoint had taken 47 minutes, unusual even by White House standards. Each guard had scrutinized her credentials, with expressions that shifted between suspicion and something else she couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps. "Dr. Hayes." A man in a charcoal suit approached, extending his hand without offering a name or title. "Thank you for responding so quickly," Eleanor nodded, adjusting her glasses more out of habit than necessity. "When the Secretary of Defense personally requests your presence, you don't exactly schedule it for next week." The unnamed man didn't smile at her attempt at levity. Instead, he gestured toward a reinforced door at the corridor's end. The biometric scanner beside it hummed as he pressed his palm against it, revealing a room that resembled a medical laboratory more than a historical research space. "The artifact is contained here," he said, stepping aside to let her enter first. The room felt wrong immediately, sterile yet somehow claustrophobic. 3 technicians monitored equipment arranged in a semicircle around a central table. On it sat a copper box, now connected to various instruments by thin cables. The object's surface caught the fluorescent light oddly, seeming to absorb rather than reflect it. The intricate etchings crawled across its surface, in patterns that made Eleanor's eyes struggle to focus. "May I?" she asked, approaching slowly. The lead technician nodded, handing her a pair of specialized gloves. "We've recorded unusual electromagnetic activity. Nothing dangerous, but unpredictable." Eleanor slipped on the gloves, noticing the slight tremble in her fingers as she reached for the artifact. The copper felt unnaturally dense through the protective material. Not cold, not warm, just present in a way that ordinary objects weren't. She traced one of the spiral patterns, recognizing elements that resembled circuit designs, but with a complexity that felt anachronistic. "This doesn't match any WD2-era technology I've studied," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone in the room. The man in the charcoal suit cleared his throat. "We believe it was housed beneath the East Wing since 1945. Construction records from that period are inconsistent." Eleanor's academic instincts flared. "Inconsistent how?" "Pages missing, names redacted, budget allocations that don't correspond to the documented work." He handed her a thin folder. "These were declassified 3 years ago. Project designation, Strategic Perception Enhancement." The folder contained fragmented reports, most heavily redacted. One paragraph remained intact, describing unprecedented clarity and battlefield assessment following exposure to the device. A general's testimonial mentioned making decisions with absolute certainty during critical operations in 1944. The final page held a single photograph of military personnel gathered around equipment that appeared similar to early radar systems, but with modifications that made no technological sense for the era. "Was this tested on soldiers?" Eleanor asked, looking up sharply. "Yes." The man's expression remained neutral. The results were mixed. Some experienced enhanced strategic thinking. Others reported headaches, disorientation. "And some never reported anything again," added a technician quietly, earning a warning glance from the man in the suit. Eleanor returned to examining the box, noting microscopic wear patterns suggesting repeated handling. When she tilted it slightly, something inside shifted with a sound like sand against metal. "I need access to the National Archives," she said firmly, "and the full project files, not just these fragments. Some records remain classified, Dr. Hayes." "Then unclassify them." Her voice hardened. "You didn't bring me here to confirm what you already know. This technology shouldn't have existed in 1945. Someone developed capabilities decades ahead of what was possible then, and someone buried it under the most secure building in America. I need to know why." The man studied her face for several uncomfortable seconds before nodding once. "You'll have limited clearance, starting tomorrow." That night in her hotel room, Eleanor spread the photocopied documents across her bed. Sleep eluded her as the implications sank in. If this device had influenced military decisions, had history unfolded naturally, or had it been manipulated? The thought sent an icy sensation down her spine that settled like lead in her stomach. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Room 237, 10 minutes. No signature. Eleanor stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Someone else knew about the artifact, someone outside official channels. The question wasn't whether to go, but whether she'd regret it more if she didn't. The National Archives building stood like a silent sentinel in the early morning light, its neoclassical columns casting long shadows across the entrance steps. Eleanor arrived at 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before official opening hours, her security clearance badge hanging heavily around her neck. A lone security guard nodded as she approached, clearly expecting her. "Third floor, section 44B, he said without preamble. "Someone will meet you there." The building's interior felt cavernous and still. Her footsteps echoed across marble floors, each sound amplified in the emptiness. The elevator hummed as it carried her upward, its brass indicator needle trembling between floors. When the doors opened, a severe-looking woman in a grey pantsuit stood waiting, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Hayes." "I'm Diane Mercer, Special Archives." Her handshake was firm, businesslike. "You have 4 hours, no photographs, no recordings, no personal devices beyond this point." Eleanor surrendered her phone and followed Mercer through a labyrinth of shelves. The special collections area smelled of preservation chemicals and aging paper. They stopped before a nondescript door marked only with an alphanumeric code. "The files you requested," Mercer said, unlocking the door. "I'll return at noon." Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls of the small room. A single desk occupied the center, its surface bare except for a yellow legal pad and pencil. Eleanor wasted no time, starting with the cabinet labeled 1941-1945 Military Research Initiatives. The first hour yielded nothing beyond what she already knew. Technical specifications for radar systems, radio communications, early computing machines, all documented innovations of their time, but nothing connected to the copper box. Frustration mounted as she worked methodically through folder after folder of wartime bureaucracy. Then, wedged between reports on anti-aircraft technology, she found it, a thin file labeled Montauk Confidential. Inside, yellowed pages contained diagrams of equipment that looked nothing like conventional 1940s military technology. Schematics showed wave patterns labeled perception thresholds and cognitive alignment fields. One page detailed an electromagnetic device capable of synchronized mental impression across multiple subjects. Eleanor's hands grew cold as she read. The technical language was clinical, but the implications were staggering. The documents described equipment designed to subtly alter how groups perceived information, influencing decision-making without detection. Between the lines lay a darker truth. This wasn't about enhancing soldiers' natural abilities. It was about control. A notation caught her eye. Coordinates: 38-57 N, 70-7-38 W. Carefully transcribing them onto the legal pad, she noticed something else. Several pages appeared to have been removed. The report's pagination jumped from 17 to 24. The missing section included something labeled Field Test Results. As she flipped to the final page, a photograph slipped out. Unlike the formal military shots she'd seen before, this showed an underground facility with concrete walls. 3 copper boxes, identical to the one she'd examined, sat connected to a larger apparatus. The photo's reverse bore a single handwritten line: "Perception-shaped is absolute power." The revelation hit her with physical force. The Allied victory, the watershed moment that defined modern history, had it been engineered? Not through superior tactics or manufacturing might, but through imperceptible manipulation. The ethical implications made her stomach twist. Footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Eleanor quickly photographed the coordinates with her mental map-making skills, committing them to memory. The door opened, but instead of Mercer, a middle-aged man in maintenance coveralls entered. Their eyes met briefly before he mumbled an apology and backed out. Something about his gaze lingered in Eleanor's mind, the focused intensity of someone who wasn't really maintenance staff. She gathered the documents to return them to their folder, then paused. The final paragraph on the last page caught her attention. West Virginia installation designated primary testing site. Subjects showing highest receptivity to signal. Eleanor felt the weight of invisible eyes on her back. The building no longer seemed like a repository of history, but a web of secrets with her at its center. As she carefully replaced the files, a certainty solidified in her mind. Someone was watching her moves very carefully. Outside, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled away from the curb as she exited the building. Same car she'd glimpsed yesterday near her hotel. Not government plates, private sector. The game had more players than she'd realized. The winding roads of West Virginia's Allegheny Mountains narrowed as Eleanor's rental car climbed higher into the forested terrain. Rain pelted the windshield, transforming the landscape into a smeared watercolor of greens and grays. The coordinates from the Montauk file had led her here, to the outskirts of White Sulphur Springs, home to the Greenbrier Resort, and, more importantly, its secret Cold War bunker. She parked half a mile from the official visitor entrance, pulling her jacket tight against the autumn chill. The tourist path would reveal nothing. She needed the original access points, the ones erased from public maps. Her research had uncovered maintenance tunnels that predated the official bunker construction, service passages forgotten when the facility was declassified in the 1990s. A deer trail through dense underbrush led her to a hillside where concrete peeked through overgrown vines. Eleanor brushed away decades of vegetation to reveal a rusted service door. Its government markings faded but still visible. The padlock had been replaced recently, too shiny compared to the weathered door. Someone still maintained this entrance. The lock picked easier than expected, almost as if it had been left that way intentionally. Inside, emergency lights cast sickly green illumination down a narrow concrete corridor. The air carried the metallic tang of old electrical equipment and standing water. Eleanor switched on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal walls marked with faded numerical sequences. Her footsteps echoed as she descended deeper into the facility. This section wasn't part of the tourist route. These corridors predated the congressional bunker, belonging to something older. The concrete here was different, poured in the 1940s rather than the 1950s. Along one wall, a series of scratches caught her attention. Not random damage, but deliberate markings. Upon closer inspection, they matched the spiral patterns from the copper box. The corridor opened into a circular room with a domed ceiling. Unlike the main bunker with its dormitories and meeting rooms, this space had been designed for a single purpose. Recessed tracks in the floor formed concentric circles, with mounting brackets positioned at precise intervals. Eleanor recognized the configuration from the photograph. This was where the larger apparatus had stood, with the copper boxes connected at the perimeter points. It was a transmission array, she whispered to the empty room, her voice bouncing back at her from the curved walls. On the far wall, faded lettering read, "Perception Program, Phase 2. Below it, someone had scratched a different message, the handwriting desperate and jagged. Not victory, it was conditioning. Eleanor's flashlight beam wavered as the implications solidified. The Allies hadn't just won the war, they'd altered how the enemy perceived reality. Strategic mistakes, failed communications, inexplicable surrenders. Had they all been manufactured through this technology? History itself had been compromised. A low electrical hum startled her, impossible in an abandoned facility. Following the sound, she discovered a small anteroom. Inside, a single bulb illuminated a desk covered with yellowed reports. Unlike the archive's carefully preserved documents, these papers bore coffee stains and handwritten notes in the margins, the real working files, hidden from official records. One report detailed Test Group Alpha, 20 soldiers exposed to the device for varying durations. Initial results showed enhanced coordination and decision-making. Later entries documented deteriorating conditions, chronic headaches, paranoia, and in 3 cases, complete cognitive realignment. Subjects who became perfect executors of command without question or hesitation. The final page contained a photo of 5 men in military uniforms, 4 generals and 1 civilian in a lab coat. Eleanor recognized one face immediately, General Marshall, who had overseen critical Pacific Theater operations. His expression in the photo was vacant, his eyes focused somewhere beyond the camera. A notation beneath the image read, "Operation Clarity, deployment authorized for Normandy and Bastogne. Full perceptual field established." Eleanor's hands trembled as she set down the document. The victories celebrated in history books, the tactical genius attributed to commanders, how much had been organic and how much engineered. The boundary between achievement and manipulation blurred before her eyes. The sudden click of a flashlight behind her made Eleanor freeze. She turned slowly to find herself facing the maintenance man from the archives, now dressed in a dark suit. His expression remained neutral as he stepped forward. "You weren't supposed to find this room, Dr. Hayes," he said quietly. "But now that you have, we need to discuss your next steps very carefully." "My name is Thomas Reed," said the man in the dark suit, maintaining a careful distance. "I work for an oversight division that doesn't officially exist." Eleanor calculated the distance to the door. Too far. "Which agency?" "None that would appear on any organizational chart." Reed gestured to the files on the desk. "You've been quite efficient, Dr. Hayes. It took our team months to piece together what you've uncovered in days." The bunker's concrete walls seemed to contract around them, the air growing thinner with each breath. Eleanor stood her ground, refusing to show the fear coursing beneath her skin. The perception program wasn't terminated after the war, was it? She watched his face for micro-expressions, any tell that might reveal deception. Reed's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's walk. These old monitoring systems still function occasionally." They moved through dimly lit corridors, their footsteps creating a syncopated rhythm against the concrete. Reed maintained precisely 3 steps ahead, leading her deeper into the facility rather than toward the exit. "After VE Day, the program was officially discontinued," Reed finally said. "Unofficially, research continued under Operation Midnight. The technology was crude but effective, creating a field that subtly influenced how information was processed by the brain." They entered a larger chamber that Eleanor recognized from the architectural blueprints, the original command center. Dust-covered control panels lined the walls, their analog dials frozen in time. A large tactical map of Europe dominated the center space, colored pins still marking troop positions from decades past. "Bastogne, December 1944, Reed said, pointing to a cluster of pins in Belgium. American troops surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. General McAuliffe's famous nuts response to surrender demands became a symbol of American determination. But it wasn't just determination, was it? Eleanor moved closer to the map. 3 copper boxes were airlifted into the area the night before, Reed confirmed. The German commanders experienced what the files called strategic disorientation, inability to capitalize on advantages, delayed responses, fractured communication. Eleanor felt sick. You're saying our celebrated victories were manufactured? Enhanced, Reed corrected. The courage was real, the sacrifice was real. The technology simply tilted the playing field. Eleanor studied the map's other markers: Normandy, the Rhine crossing, the Battle of the Bulge, history's turning points, potentially influenced by hidden technology. Why show me this? She demanded. Why not bury the copper box when it was found, destroy the evidence? Reed's expression hardened. Because it's happening again, Dr. Hayes. The box found in the White House wasn't lost. It was deliberately placed there in 1945 as part of a network, and someone has reactivated it. The revelation hung between them like an electrical charge. Eleanor's academic detachment crumbled, replaced by something more primal. The vertigo of realizing the ground beneath you isn't solid after all. Who? She managed. That's what we need you to help us determine. The technology has evolved. Modern electronics, quantum computing, the potential applications have expanded beyond battlefield manipulation. Eleanor's mind raced through the implications: election outcomes, diplomatic negotiations, financial markets. Any decision-making process could be susceptible. I need to see the original research, she said firmly. All of it, not just the fragments you've been feeding me. Reed hesitated, then removed a small flash drive from his pocket. This contains the unredacted files from Project Midnight. After you've reviewed them, meet me tomorrow at the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park. The military records there contain something we've been missing. As she reached for the drive, Reed caught her wrist. His fingers pressed against her pulse point, not threatening but measuring. I should warn you, Dr. Hayes, once you possess this information, there are parties who will consider you a liability. My division can offer limited protection, but ultimately, your safety depends on your discretion. Eleanor pulled her hand away, the drive now clutched in her palm. Who exactly are you protecting, Mr. Reed? History or those who manipulated it? For the first time, Reed's composed facade cracked slightly. Perhaps both. The question isn't just who used this technology, but who they used it against, and whether they ever truly stopped. That night in her motel room, Eleanor reviewed the files. Project Midnight had extended far beyond military applications: intelligence agencies, presidential advisors, industrial contracts. Names she recognized from history books appeared in contexts that rewrote their legacies. Heroes became puppets, visionaries became vessels. The deeper she read, the more a singular question consumed her. If perception itself could be engineered, what part of her reality remained untainted? The FDR Presidential Library stood bathed in morning light, its brick facade a testament to an era when power seemed more clearly defined. Eleanor arrived early, scanning the parking lot for surveillance. The flash drive from Reed felt like a live grenade in her pocket, volatile information that could detonate careers, legacies, perhaps even national narratives. As she approached the entrance, a familiar figure materialized beside her, not Reed, but David Monroe, a military historian she'd collaborated with on previous research projects. His unexpected presence sent a jolt through her system. Eleanor, what a coincidence. His smile seemed genuine, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. Working on a new project, she measured her response carefully. Just following a research thread on wartime communications technology. Fascinating period, David nodded, falling into step beside her. The technological leaps between 41 and 45 were unprecedented. I'm here researching General Patton's communication systems during the Ardennes offensive. The coincidence felt manufactured, too convenient. Eleanor maintained a neutral expression while her mind raced. David had connections throughout the military historical community. His expertise would be valuable, but could she trust him? Reed had warned about parties who would consider her a liability. Perhaps we could compare notes, she offered, watching his reaction. Something flickered across David's face. Eagerness. Relief. I'd appreciate that. I've hit some roadblocks with redacted communications from December 44. Inside, they settled in the research room, requesting materials on military communications technology. Eleanor deliberately kept her inquiries broad, watching which documents captured David's attention. He seemed particularly interested when she requested files on experimental radar systems. "You know," David said casually, "I've always been fascinated by the technological anomalies of that period. Equipment that seemed ahead of its time." Eleanor tensed. "Such as directional interference systems, cognitive science applications." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There are gaps in the record, equipment that appears in inventories but never in technical manuals." The bait was obvious. Eleanor countered, "Military bureaucracy is rarely comprehensive." "True," David smiled, "but sometimes the gaps tell the real story." For the next hour, they worked side by side, sharing occasional findings. Eleanor carefully fed him innocuous information while observing his note-taking patterns. When David excused himself for a coffee break, she quickly photographed his notebook with her phone. One page contained a list of coordinates, including the Greenbrier location she'd already visited. When he returned, she made her move. "I'm heading to the Maryland Historical Military Museum tomorrow. They have some interesting communications equipment from the European theater. Mind if I join you?" His question came too quickly, too eagerly. "I've been meaning to examine their collection." "Of course," she replied, the trap set. The museum, housed in a converted armory building, contained one of the most comprehensive collections of W-Patu's military technology on the East Coast. Eleanor led David through exhibits of radio equipment, code machines, and tactical maps. In a back room dedicated to experimental technology, they found what she'd been seeking: a glass case containing recording equipment labeled Field Communication Monitor, 1944. "This is interesting," David said, studying the device. "The technology seems inconsistent with the period." "That's because it wasn't just for communication," Eleanor replied, watching his reaction closely. "It was for perception monitoring." David's posture changed subtly, a tightening across the shoulders, a stillness that hadn't been there before. "What makes you say that?" "The frequency range is wrong for standard communications, but perfect for monitoring brainwave patterns affected by electromagnetic stimulation." She paused, then added, "Like those produced by copper boxes with circuit-like engravings." The museum's ambient sounds faded as David's expression transformed. The collegial mask slipped, revealing something colder, more calculating. "How much do you know, Eleanor?" "Enough to understand what was hidden in the White House, enough to know it wasn't just a historical artifact." David glanced around the empty room, then spoke in a measured tone. "There are people who believe this technology could still serve a purpose. National security challenges haven't diminished since 1945. Who are you working for, David?" His laugh lacked humor. "The better question is, who are you working for? Reed's Oversight Division doesn't have authorization for this investigation." The revelation hit her like ice water. David knew Reed. The players in this game were interconnected in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I need to make a call," David said, stepping away. "Stay here." The moment he left, Eleanor moved quickly to the museum's storage area, finding a maintenance door that led outside. As she slipped away, her phone vibrated with a text from Reed. "Monroe compromised, meeting location changed." In her car, Eleanor's hands trembled against the steering wheel. David had been tracking her movements, feeding information to someone else. The betrayal stung professionally, but the personal dimension cut deeper. She'd trusted him, shared research methodologies, even considered him a friend. As she pulled onto the highway, the rearview mirror revealed a black sedan merging into traffic behind her. Different from the one in Washington, but with the same purpose. The game board had expanded, and she was no longer just a researcher. She'd become a piece in play. The coastal town of Chincoteague, Virginia, emerged from the morning fog like a watercolor painting coming into focus. Eleanor kept her hood up as she walked along the weathered boardwalk. The coordinates Reed had texted her, leading to an abandoned fish processing plant at the harbor's edge. Salt-corroded metal creaked in the wind, gull cries punctuating the rhythmic slap of waves against wooden pilings. She'd driven through the night, switching vehicles twice at prearranged locations. The black sedan had followed for the first 100 miles before she'd managed to lose it in a labyrinthine industrial park outside Baltimore. Sleep deprivation blurred the edges of her vision, but adrenaline kept her alert, hyper-aware of every movement in her peripheral vision. The processing plant's faded sign, Atlantic Seafood Processing Co.S., Esther, 1926, hung askew above rusted doors, chained shut for appearances. A smaller side entrance yielded to the key Reed had left under a specific dock plank. Inside, the building smelled of decades-old fish oil and salt-cured wood. Industrial refrigeration units lined the walls, their compressors long silent. Dr. Hayes. Reed emerged from behind a partition, his suit replaced by casual clothes that didn't quite fit his rigid bearing. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, hardened by exhaustion and betrayal. "There are always choices, though rarely comfortable ones." Reed led her deeper into the building past gutted machinery. "Monroe works for a private consortium, former military personnel, defense contractors, intelligence officers who believe the perception technology could be weaponized against modern threats." "And you don't?" Reed's expression tightened. "My division believes the technology is too unpredictable, too ethically compromised. But we're a minority opinion." In the building's back section, Reed unlocked a heavy door revealing a small room that had once been an office. A table held maps, documents, and, Eleanor's breath caught, a familiar copper-colored object. "This isn't from the White House," she said immediately, noting subtle differences in the engraving patterns. "No, this was recovered from a storage facility in Newport News, one of 3 remaining components we've been able to track." Eleanor approached carefully. Unlike the White House artifact, this component was damaged, its casing cracked to reveal crystalline structures inside, not electronic circuits as she'd expected, but something that resembled synthetic quartz formations. "This isn't 1940s technology," she whispered. "No," Reed agreed. "It's not 1940s, 1950s, or even modern technology. The metallurgical analysis dates the outer casing to the 1940s, but the internal components—" He hesitated. "We have no manufacturing process that could create those crystal structures. Not then, not now." Eleanor's scientific mind rebelled against the implication. "That's impossible." "And yet, here it is." Reed gestured to the fractured device. The perception manipulation was real, documented, verified, but the technology source remains unexplained. With gloved hands, Eleanor examined the artifact. The crystal formations appeared to be arranged in precise geometric patterns, their structure reminiscent of advanced quantum computing components, but fundamentally different. When she tilted the device, the internal formations seemed to shift slightly, reorienting themselves despite the absence of power. "It's still active," she realized, setting it down carefully. "Minimally, but yes, these devices maintain a low-level energy signature that our instruments can barely detect." Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. The original program documentation. Who designed these? Whose research led to their creation? Reed slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single photograph of a man in a lab coat, his face partially obscured. The name below, Dr. Adam Weiss, Project Director. Weiss had no prior publications, no academic record we can find before 1942. After 1946, he vanished completely. A pseudonym? Or something else entirely? Reed's tone suggested deeper implications he wasn't prepared to voice. A sudden noise outside, tires on gravel, made them both freeze. Reed moved quickly to a window, his body tensing at whatever he saw. "Monroe's people. They've traced you here faster than I anticipated." He turned to Eleanor, decision crystallizing in his expression. "Take the device and these coordinates." He handed her a slip of paper. "There's a boat docked behind the building. The owner knows to expect someone." "And go where?" "The final piece is at those coordinates, an offshore research platform disguised as an abandoned oil rig. Find it, document everything, then destroy all 3 components." "Why me?" Eleanor demanded. "Why not your division?" Reed checked his weapon, a gesture that confirmed her suspicions about his true role. Because officially my division doesn't know these components still exist, I've exceeded my authority. And because you can recognize patterns we might miss, historical connections that explain where this technology truly originated. The sound of car doors slamming spurred them into motion. As they moved toward the back exit, Reed gripped Eleanor's arm. When you find the last component, you'll understand why history itself is at stake. This isn't just about who won a war, it's about how reality is perceived by everyone, every day. The cold weight of the damaged device in her bag pulled at Eleanor's shoulder as she slipped onto the waiting boat. As the small craft pulled away from the dock, she saw Reed confronting several men at the building's entrance, buying her time with what would almost certainly be his career, possibly his freedom. The boat cut through fog-shrouded waters, carrying her toward answers that seemed increasingly dangerous to know. The helicopter's rotors sliced through morning air as Eleanor watched Washington's monuments shrink beneath her. The past 72 hours existed in her memory as fragmented images: the abandoned oil platform where she'd recovered the final component, the Coast Guard interception that wasn't Coast Guard at all, the silent flight to Andrews Air Force Base, and now this unmarked helicopter carrying her back to where it had all begun. The summons had arrived via military police. Not an arrest, but not optional either. The 3 copper devices were no longer in her possession, confiscated by stern-faced officials who'd provided no identification. Reed had vanished, his phone disconnected, his division apparently non-existent according to the Pentagon database she'd accessed before they'd taken her laptop. The helicopter descended toward the White House, landing not on the main pad, but on a secondary area near the East Wing. Armed personnel in unmarked tactical gear escorted her through a service entrance and down familiar corridors. The renovation site where the first box had been discovered was now sealed behind temporary walls marked Structural Assessment. They led her into a wood-paneled room she recognized from news broadcasts, a small meeting room adjacent to the Oval Office. 4 people waited inside: 2 military officers with general stars, a silver-haired woman in a tailored suit, and, surprisingly, David Monroe. "Dr. Hayes," the woman spoke first, "I'm Director Carson, National Security Council. Thank you for joining us." The euphemism for her forced appearance wasn't lost on Eleanor. "Where's Thomas Reed?" "Mr. Reed has been debriefed," Carson replied, her expression revealing nothing. "His unauthorized investigation has been integrated into official channels." Monroe avoided eye contact as Eleanor took the only empty chair. On the conference table, the 3 copper devices had been arranged in a triangular configuration. The White House component now had its case opened, revealing the same crystalline structures she'd seen in the damaged unit. "You've created quite a problem for us, Dr. Hayes," said one of the generals, his voice surprisingly soft for his imposing presence. "Historical perception management operations aren't meant for public awareness." "Historical," Eleanor challenged. The component from Chincoteague was still active. A glance passed between the officials, confirmation she hadn't expected. "The technology has evolved over time," Carson admitted. "What began as crude influence systems in 1944 developed into more sophisticated applications during the Cold War. The project was officially discontinued in 1975. "Officially," Eleanor echoed. The second general placed a folder before her. "This contains the complete perception program history, including post-war applications. You'll find signatures from every administration authorizing continued research, Democratic and Republican alike." Eleanor opened the folder, her academic detachment crumbling as she absorbed the contents. The program hadn't just influenced battlefield decisions, it had shaped summit meetings, arms negotiations, regional conflicts. The scale was staggering, the ethical implications catastrophic. "Why show me this?" she asked, looking up from pages that could destroy a nation's historical credibility. "Because someone has reactivated the network," Carson said grimly. "Not us. The energy signature began 3 months ago, coinciding with the discovery of the White House component, but the activation came from outside." "Who?" "We were hoping you could help us determine that," Monroe finally spoke, his voice strained. "The historical patterns you've identified might reveal who gained access to the activation protocols. Eleanor studied the faces around her. Powerful people unaccustomed to fear, now showing its subtle signs, tightened jaw muscles, shortened breath cycles, micro-adjustments of posture. "You're afraid," she realized aloud, "not of exposure, but of the technology itself." "The original system required 3 components to create a limited field effect," explained the first general. "But with modern amplification technology, even one component could theoretically affect perception across an entire region. 3 working in concert again." He left the implication hanging. The second general leaned forward. "We need to neutralize the network permanently, but first we need to understand who activated it and why." Eleanor's gaze returned to the 3 devices. The crystalline structures seemed to pulse subtly, reorienting themselves despite the absence of visible power sources. A pattern emerged in her mind: the historical applications, the timing of discoveries, the locations. "It was never just about winning a war," she said slowly, the realization crystallizing. "It was about managing the peace that followed, creating a perception of stability, of moral clarity in a morally ambiguous world." "Yes," Carson acknowledged. "But that's not what's happening now." Eleanor placed her hands on the table, inches from the nearest device. A subtle vibration transferred through the wood, up her arms, settling in her chest as an irregular heartbeat. "Turn them on," she said suddenly. "All 3 together." Alarm flashed across Monroe's face. "That's precisely what we're trying to prevent. If you want to understand who's controlling them and how, you need to see the network in operation." Eleanor met each gaze around the table, under controlled conditions, with someone who can recognize historical patterns in the effect. A silent communication passed between the officials before Carson nodded once. Technicians were summoned, equipment wheeled in. Eleanor watched as each component was connected to monitoring devices, power sources engaged. The crystalline structures within each unit began to glow faintly, pulsing in synchronized rhythm. Screens displayed data streams, electromagnetic field measurements, neural response patterns from sensors placed on volunteer staff. But Eleanor's attention fixed on something else: the subtle shift in how everyone in the room began processing information. Questions became simpler, complexities flattened, moral certainty crystallized where ambiguity should exist. "Turn it off," she ordered, recognition dawning. "It's not about controlling specific thoughts, it's about simplifying perception itself, making complex reality seem straightforward, conclusive, absolute." As the devices powered down, the evidence was clear on the monitoring equipment. But more telling was the collective disorientation that followed, the return of complexity, of doubt, of the true weight of moral questions. "History itself was simplified," Eleanor whispered. "Not falsified, simplified." Hand someone wants that simplification again. The implications hung in the air between them, a world of absolute certainty where difficult questions had clear answers, where moral compromise became invisible. Not mind control, but reality curation, perhaps the more insidious form of power. As Eleanor's discovery reveals, history is not just a collection of facts, it's a narrative shaped by those who control how we perceive it. The line between truth and manipulation has always been thinner than we dare admit. What would you do if you discovered that reality itself could be engineered? Would you expose the truth, knowing it might shatter the foundations of trust in our institutions? Or would you, like so many before, decide that some secrets are better left buried? Perhaps the most disturbing question isn't whether our past was manipulated, but whether our present continues to be. In a world where information flows constantly, yet understanding seems increasingly elusive, we must ask ourselves, are our certainties truly our own, or are they shaped by forces beyond our awareness? Eleanor's journey reminds us that the most dangerous power isn't control over armies or economies, but control over perception itself. If this story resonated with you, there's a reason. We all sense the fragility of truth in our hyper-connected age. Take a moment to share this video with someone who appreciates that not all mysteries have comfortable answers, and subscribe for more explorations into the shadows where history and conspiracy collide. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones powerful interests don't want told.